Stop, you haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Subscribe now, we have new stories every day. Now let's go. Nicole and I first crossed paths at a church event in a small coastal town on the East Coast. From the start, it felt like we had a lot in common: beach days, movie nights, pro sports, running, volleyball, and parties. Friends would often joke that we seemed like a perfect match. We officially became a couple during a volleyball tournament, which happened because my buddy, Chris, who was supposed to partner with Nicole, had to bail at the last minute. He called saying, "I can't make it. You two should just team up for the tournament." We agreed and practiced a bit beforehand. Nicole was fearless on the court, diving for the ball and setting it up beautifully. I was tall, with a good arm for hitting, and together, we made a powerful team. We ended up winning the tournament and celebrated with some of the other teams at a local bar. That night, Nicole kept reaching over to touch me, showing her interest, and honestly, I was completely taken by her beauty and her presence. After the night wound down, she invited me back to her apartment. She kicked off her shoes, settled onto her couch, and I found a seat beside her. "Wow, what a day," she sighed with a satisfied smile. "It means a lot to me too," I admitted, feeling the moment's weight. "When Chris couldn't play, I figured we'd lose. When he introduced us, I thought you were cute, but I didn't expect we'd actually win," she chuckled. "Well, here we are. You're amazing on the court, and do you really think I'm cute?" "Something like that," I said, feeling my face warm. The wind and the night felt surreal, and I blurted out, "I really like you." Then, leaning in, I kissed her gently on the forehead. She laughed. "Couldn't have imagined today would end like this, huh?" "Not at all," I replied, still a bit stunned. "You were so good at volleyball, I was struggling to keep my focus. Turns out, you're not only beautiful, but talented too." Nicole moved a little closer, giving me this intense look, her face just inches from mine, hand trailing slowly up my thigh. "And how does this make you feel?" she asked softly. I could barely breathe. "A little dizzier and definitely a lot drier," I managed to confess. She let her hand travel further, her touch sending a jolt through me. "How about now?" I was at a loss for words. She leaned closer, locking her gaze with mine. "This is making me think less about volleyball skills and more about you," she whispered. "I got a few skills outside of volleyball, I managed to joke. "Right now, that's the last thing I'm thinking about," she replied, and before I knew it, we were wrapped up in a kiss that left me breathless. I leaned back, looking into her face, her eyes bright, her smile drawing me in deeper. "Why the smile?" she asked, amused. "You're just perfect." "From your smile to those cute freckles," I said, not even trying to hold back. Her expression softened, and a tear slid down her cheek before she kissed me again, her hand tracing over me, testing my readiness. "I want to see what more I can make you feel," she murmured, leading me to her bedroom. Clothes were gone in a blur, and before I knew it, we were caught up in a whirlwind of touch and sensation. Her hand slipped to my waist, guiding me closer as she whispered, "I love how you feel, Kirk." She pulled me toward her, and as we lay there, I felt like I was experiencing something extraordinary. A year passed, and our lives had intertwined so completely that we knew we wanted to make it permanent. We picked a small Caribbean island for our wedding. 2 years later, we were married, vowing to live as one. Our physical connection was strong, though sometimes I struggled to keep up with her energy. Shortly after, we bought a house, a charming, older place in a prime spot. Within weeks, we marked every room as ours, even the backyard under a dark sky. She'd often joked that it was a full tour of our love. People even told us we were the perfect couple, a notion that seemed to follow us. We made good money, her working in tech equipment sales while I was in software development. In our free time, we stayed active. I was big on mountain biking and photography, while Nicole loved cooking, pop culture, and keeping fit. She'd dive into pop culture quizzes, and I'd marvel at her knowledge, especially when she was showing off her cooking skills. Friends and family couldn't see us with anyone else. Even our political views lined up. In an era when being conservative was popular, we'd still agree on candidates and propositions every election cycle. Our rare disagreements were quickly resolved, even if friends were around to witness. They'd just laugh, nodding along, "Yeah, they're perfect for each other." Work-wise, we were respected, and occasionally my software skills came in handy for her job. One night, I heard her frustrated in our home office, struggling with a new program. I stepped in, and after she explained, I wrote a quick fix that not only sped up her work, but improved the software for her whole team. She thanked me profusely and well, in her own way. We'd always manage our finances well, saving for vacations, a better home, and upgrading our cars. Whenever Nicole received a big bonus from a project, we'd reassess, often deciding to buy, renovate, and rent out properties. 7 years in, we own 3 houses and a condo. I handled the renovations and tenant management, making upgrades like installing smart locks, security systems, and fixing sprinklers. After our 9th anniversary, weekends often found me tackling projects while Nicole worked harder than ever at her job. One Saturday, I had planned to work on the irrigation system at one of our rental properties. As I was grabbing my tools in the garage, she called out, "Kurt, baby, before you get lost in those pipes, I need a little help with something in the bedroom. Is there a leak somewhere?" I yelled back, halfway to the truck. Her voice was coy. "There aren't that many pipes in our bedroom ceiling. Maybe you should come check it out." Dropping my tools, I headed upstairs. When I opened the bedroom door, I froze. Nicole was sprawled out on the bed, her body adorned with nothing but a small buzzing toy and some playful clamps. My jaw dropped. "Oh, Kurt," she purred, breathing heavily. "I think you might need to hang out here with me a while longer." I realized I'd been holding my breath. Dropping my keys, I tore off my clothes without a second thought. Fixing pipes would have to wait. Nicole had me fully absorbed. By the time we were done, I felt like I'd handled an intricate project, only this one involved a whole lot of measuring and no shortage of digging and inserting. It was a day of intense passion, both of us swept up in the moment, reveling in each other. Over time, we'd occasionally discuss the idea of having kids. Now that we owned multiple properties and had solid savings, I was eager to start that chapter, but she wanted a little longer to hit some more career milestones. Nicole had recently earned a big promotion, which was a proud achievement for her, and I could understand her wanting to be financially rock solid before moving forward. For our 10th anniversary, our friends and family threw us a party themed perfect for each other. We won a cornhole game and celebrated with a 4-day vineyard tour, traveling in style with rented limousines. When we got back, we barely made it through the front door before shedding our clothes. That night, the house felt like our playground all over again, celebrating on the stairs, the living room, and the bedroom. Life was good. Not long after, Nicole got promoted again, this time to Director of Divisional Services. We celebrated at Lade's, a trendy restaurant downtown, and later that evening at home. Around the same time, she was introduced to Edward Cook, a new director at her office. Edward was tall, good-looking, and known for his charm and sharp suits. Women at the office admired his confidence and his easy smile, and Edward definitely noticed Nicole. Even though her company discouraged relationships between management levels, Nicole and Edward were on equal footing, so there was technically no rule against them getting friendly. Their CEO, Rosalind, a divorced mother of 2, often hosted events where Edward would get plenty of attention. Edward, with his eye on Nicole, seemed to believe no marriage was without its flaws and that Nicole might appreciate some adventure. They began having lunches together to talk about work, and Edward did his homework. He learned about my job, her favorite restaurants, hobbies, and foods, often steering their conversations to flatter her, emphasizing her value at work and boosting her confidence. Their company had targeted new accounts in Baltimore, where Edward's accounts fell within Nicole's regional zone. He often asked her to travel to Baltimore to discuss her division strategies, making sure her work received full recognition. He'd arranged high-end dinners and interesting events, and Nicole found herself enjoying the time they spent together. It didn't take long for her to become engrossed in her work with Edward, and at home I could feel a shift. We weren't as physically close, and she seemed preoccupied. When I tried bringing it up, her response usually led to complaints about work stress, adding to the distance between us. In an effort to make things right, she planned an anniversary surprise, a trip to Austria, a place I'd always dreamed of visiting. She told me about it in May, and we celebrated the idea by spending the day in bed, planning our itinerary and browsing Austrian destinations together. It felt like a fresh start, but a few weeks later, her company scheduled an executive retreat in July, set to take place in Jacksonville, and she was expected to attend. Over dinner one night, she looked at me, her expression hesitant. "Kurt, I got some good news and some bad news. Which you want to hear first? Just spill it, Nicole," I replied, trying to brace myself. She took a deep breath. "All right, I've decided we should delay the September trip to Austria and use the money to keep growing our savings instead. Plus, my company's executive retreat is in Jacksonville this July, so we can turn it into a little holiday." I sat there for a solid minute, stunned. "Wait, I thought you'd already be working in Jacksonville in July." "I will, but we'll get a hotel room covered by the company, so we save a lot." "Jacksonville's a great place to relax, beaches, restaurants, maybe even some volleyball if we get the chance," she added brightly. I wasn't convinced, but if you're there for work, how are we supposed to do anything together? "Play volleyball, hit the beach. Don't worry, work's supposed to wrap up by noon each day. We'll have our afternoons and the whole weekend to ourselves," she said, giving me that reassuring smile. "Look, babe, I know we've saved a lot, and yeah, Jacksonville could be fun, but I don't see why we have to cancel Austria. I've been looking forward to that, and I was hoping we'd get a solid week to ourselves. Besides, I don't know if you can ever have too much saved." But she already canceled her tickets for September, leaving me no choice but to agree. So I made the best of it, booking us a nice restaurant in advance and checking into any local volleyball tournaments. Maybe Jacksonville would be a good time after all. Just before Jacksonville, Nicole had another work trip to Baltimore. I noticed she'd been less forthcoming about her time there lately, and when I'd ask about her evenings, she'd say she had dinners with clients or meetings that stretched on. I tried to shrug it off, convincing myself it was just the demands of her job. Once we got to Jacksonville, I had to admit the city was great. We arrived on Sunday afternoon, checked into the hotel, and spent time on the beach before heading to dinner. Nicole even managed to squeeze in a few volleyball matches with me, which made the star of the trip feel promising. That evening, her company hosted a welcome dinner, and she asked if I could attend. Her boss, Rosalind, agreed, so I tagged along. At the dinner, I watched as Nicole spent most of her time with Edward, one of her colleagues, which rubbed me the wrong way. When I suggested she stick closer to me or that we leave, she brushed it off as business, saying, "Remember, we're here for a work retreat." While I lingered, Rosalind, her CEO, struck up a conversation with me. After a few drinks, her tone turned flirty. She laughed a little too freely, even tracing her finger along my arm, which felt odd. To keep things respectful, I politely excused myself and made my way to the restroom. I could tell Rosalind was a bit embarrassed, and when I returned, I steered clear of her for the rest of the evening. Later that night, I managed to convince Nicole to stay at the bar for a few more drinks, but Edward soon joined us, cutting short any alone time we had. We decided to call it a night, but when we got back to the room, Nicole was too exhausted for any intimacy. As the week went on, her half-day work hours stretched to late afternoons, often leaving me on my own. 4 of the evenings were taken up by exclusive company events, so I ended up waiting for her in the hotel hallway, just hoping we'd have time together. I spent some time at the beach, got in some volleyball, and noticed that a few women there were friendly, but it wasn't what I wanted. I wanted my wife back. The atmosphere between us was off, and it didn't help that Rosalind, still smarting from my rejection, began using me as an example of a worker be compared to executives like Edward, making snide remarks whenever she could. By the end of the week, I felt like we barely connected. With the weekend included, we'd been intimate maybe 4 times. It wasn't the anniversary celebration I'd hoped for, but Nicole seemed more energized than ever about her job when we returned home. Soon, life went back to routine. She spent more and more time working in Baltimore, and every time I asked about it, I got the usual meetings and client dinners explanation. In mid-September, I tried to bring it up again. "Nicole, I've never seen your company so focused on Baltimore. What changed?" "You're right, Kurt. We weren't this involved there before, but we're expanding quickly. Having a cluster of clients in one place lets us address more issues in a single trip. And why are you handling so much sales?" I asked, pushing for more. Rosalind thinks having someone from post-sales there during the sales process boosts the close rate, and it's been working. "This is all part of a year-long focus. Things should slow down afterward," she replied. "I'll still have meetings, but the focus will shift more toward services. I hope she'd be around more, and that once the year was up, we'd get back on track." Lately, we felt more like roommates than a married couple, our closeness limited to about 4 times a month. When she returned from Baltimore one Friday, I'd prepared grilled steaks and her favorite wine, hoping to make the night special. She hugged me, gave me a quick kiss, then poured herself a second glass of wine. "Thanks for the meal, Kurt," she said. "Feels like a holiday. I'm just glad you'll be home for the week. I'm hoping we can finally relax a bit." She gave a tight smile. "The relaxation won't last, honey. I have to go back to Baltimore tomorrow night." I felt a wave of disappointment wash over me. "I thought you'd be home all week." "Sorry, Kurt. This is how the schedule played out," she said firmly, and I could feel the finality in her words. I started clearing the dishes in silence, aware that the evening wouldn't go as planned. She watched me from her chair, sipping her wine. When I went to the laundry room to start a load, I called out, "Got anything for me to wash before you head out?" "No need, Kurt. Everything's clean," she replied. "You just got back. I know hotel laundry isn't cheap. Does the company pay for that?" "No, I did my laundry at Edward's apartment," she said casually. I stood there, speechless. "Wait, what? Is that where you've been staying the last few times?" She looked at me, her expression almost dismissive. "It's not about saving money, Kurt. Look, things need to change. I'm nearly 40, and when I reflect on my life, there are certain things I need. If I stay on this path, I won't achieve them. Working closely with Edward, I've realized the life I want. He takes me to Broadway, museums, and fine restaurants. He's polished, confident, the kind of man who treats me like a queen. And as much as I respect you, you're just not that." I could barely process her words. "Nicole, we talked about building a life and a family together. What about all that? I don't think my body's ready to slow down for kids, Kurt. It's just not going to happen," she said flatly. The reality sank in. "Have you been with him, Nicole?" I asked, anger building. My body is my business, she shot back coldly. I'll be with who I choose, and if that's Edward or anyone else, it's my decision. This is insane. You once told me you love me, I said, feeling desperate. I think I was mistaken, Kurt. I don't believe I ever really loved you, and it's time to move on. I'm filing for divorce, and stop calling me baby. It's not appropriate for someone who won't be your wife. The words hit like a punch. I was numb, wondering if I'd done something so terrible that it pushed her away, or if she simply saw me as less somehow. So you're choosing him over me because he's better? Yes, that's a fair summary, she replied coldly. We're just different people, Kurt, and all these new executive friends of yours think the same. I asked, incredulous. Yes, people like Rosalind and Morgan have said as much. It's just obvious. Oh, I see. Well, where are you sleeping tonight? I asked, struggling to keep steady. You can have the guest room, she answered. Fine, I replied, heading down the hall. The next day, as soon as she left, I began the painful process of finding a divorce attorney. I met Melanie, a sharp-eyed blonde who listened intently as I poured out the story. She offered advice on legal steps, and we began untangling our finances and dividing assets, which included the properties we'd bought together. I reached out to friends and family, explaining the situation, which didn't take long to prompt an angry call from Nicole in Baltimore. You idiot! Who gave you the right to tell everyone about our divorce? She yelled. You did, Nicole, I replied, keeping my voice as calm as possible. When she demanded, when you said you were divorcing me and that you'd rather spend your life with that idiot in Baltimore, I reminded her. I thought we handled this quietly, mentioning it at family events, not making some big announcement, and I didn't give you permission to say any of that, she fumed. What's wrong with what I said? I asked, genuinely confused. Nicole read from a message her sister had sent her. Unfortunately, I have to announce that Nicole has chosen to neglect her marriage vows and take a new lover from her company who seduced her. We won't be able to join social events or continue to engage as a loving couple. Please respect the sensitivity of our situation and allow us to end our marriage peacefully. What's the problem, Nicole? I stand by what I said, I replied, my voice firm. She glared, clearly furious. It makes it sound like I was some fool who let herself be seduced by some slick guy with more power. Nicole, you wanted the divorce, and honestly, I wouldn't stay married to you now even if I still loved you like I did a week ago. Staying with someone who's openly cheated and left me is not an option, I said, feeling a strange sense of relief and speaking the truth. I've already been tested for STDs and I'm awaiting results. I suggest you do the same. If he was willing to sleep with you while you were married, who knows how many others he's been with. With that, she ended the call abruptly. I almost laughed at her reaction, though it did little to ease the ache I felt. That night, sleep wouldn't come easily. My mind kept revisiting the good times, our trips, the countless places we'd been together, the love we'd shared. Even food has lost its taste lately. Eventually, the legal process moved forward. Lawyers took over, dividing assets and sorting out retirement accounts, separating our bank accounts, and canceling shared credit cards. I didn't want to stay in the house we'd once shared when things were good, so she got it. I kept the apartment, which was closer to the city center, a better fit for her new image. The paperwork was filed, and everything finalized. I settled into a new apartment, not far from the condominium we once shared. About 2 months after she told me she wanted changes in her life, we hardly spoke outside of legal matters. Occasionally, I'd run into her at church or at a social event. One Sunday, she introduced me to Edward, the man she'd chosen over me. This is Edward, she said with a forced smile. Edward extended his hand with a smug grin. I'd heard a lot about you, Kurt. I looked him straight in the eye, my hands remaining at my sides. I wish I'd known where this was headed when I first met you in Jacksonville. I glanced at Nicole, shook my head, and walked away. In the months that followed, I divided our mutual friends into those I could trust and those likely to relay anything back to Nicole. With some, I decided to keep things superficial, catching a beer or playing catch now and then, but keeping my deeper thoughts and feelings to myself. Neil Sadako was right, breaking up really is hard to do. My coworkers were supportive when they found out. One day, my boss, Evan, called me into his office. Kurt, if you need anything, let me know. I know this must be a lot to handle, and sometimes just talking it out can help. I nodded, grateful. Thanks, Evan. It's been rough, that's for sure. He leaned in, his tone serious. Listen, if the thought of revenge crosses your mind, don't do anything that'll get you into trouble. A few minutes of satisfaction isn't worth a lifetime of consequences. I've seen people ruin their lives over time. I managed to laugh. Thanks, Evan. Sounds like you know what you're talking about. He gave a slight nod. Let's just say I've learned a thing or two. I was curious. What kind of revenge could someone in my position even go for? He thought for a moment. Think of it like a programming problem, Kurt. Break down the elements. What's the goal? What's unacceptable? And what's risky? Physical violence is off the table, obviously, but there are other ways to get satisfaction: financial, legal, even social. Be creative, just like you are in coding. You've given me a lot to think about, I said, trying to absorb his advice. Take whatever time you need, Evan added. I took him up on his offer, finding some peace in focusing my mind on strategies rather than emotions. That afternoon, I got permission to use the conference room and set up a brainstorming board on an old easel. I wrote out categories for potential revenge: social, financial, professional, self-esteem, and legal. I invited a few close friends from work to help me think it through. They suggested adding physical and technical to the list, and ideas started flowing, some practical, others far-fetched. We let the ideas come freely, no judgment, which led to some interesting thoughts. At the end of the day, I took a picture of the board, locked it in a closet in the conference room, and thanked Evan again for his patience, promising to limit future brainstorming to before lunch or after hours. A couple of days later, I was at the gym with a friend from church. "Are you going to join the annual beach volleyball tournament next month?" he asked. I hadn't thought about it, I admitted. My usual partner and I split. He gave me a sympathetic look. "I know, but it always lifts your spirits. Why not join the men's team or something?" "Probably not this year," I said, feeling the sting of memories. "Oh, I saw that Nicole signed up and I thought of you." "Did she register for mixed doubles?" he asked. "Yeah, she did," I replied. "What's the registration deadline?" he asked. "A week before," I told him. That night, lying in bed, I thought it over and decided maybe there was more to this than I considered. The next morning, I added a new line to the board in the office: sports results, to the first column. At lunch, I called my revenge team to revisit the matrix and brainstorm again. Later that day, I went out for a drink with an old friend from college, catching up, engaging his insights on my situation. The following day, Ben, one of the guys from my revenge crew, stopped by my office, shutting the door behind him. "Kurt, how serious are you about getting revenge?" he asked. I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well, some of the stuff we brainstormed was just blowing off steam. But some ideas could backfire big time, especially if any of it crossed into questionable territory." I smirked. "Come on, Ben. We were joking about the extreme stuff. I'm not taking anybody out," I assured him. "I wouldn't mind if Edward magically disappeared, but I'm not going to do anything illegal. And as for Nicole, no chance. I'll never feel the same way or trust her again." Ben nodded, relieved. "Good to know. But if you ever thought of reconciling, it's probably best to avoid these ideas." "Ben, I'd never go back to her in this lifetime. The only thing I'm interested in is showing her what she lost by leaving me. I want her to feel the weight of what she's done," I told Ben, my voice filled with emotion. Spitting on someone's love and trust should have consequences. Love and trust are everything in life, and she ripped both away like they meant nothing. Ben nodded, taking it in. "All right, Kurt," he said, then paused. "But where'd this perspective come from?" "I've got a few more things to work through," I replied. "We might need some advice from Evan or someone who knows the legal side well." "I'll be in touch," he replied. The days passed, some easier than others, and I focused on my work in volleyball to keep myself moving forward. I found a new partner for the upcoming tournament, a striking woman named Dana Harris, and erased the physical pain line from the board, deciding to let go of any thoughts that leaned toward revenge. My boss didn't bring up my situation again, and Ben had gone quiet on the subject, which made me think this whole thing might have been a good mental exercise, but not something to act on. When the weekend of the volleyball tournament finally arrived, the place was buzzing. Teams from neighboring states and different churches showed up, turning this into a major event. It had grown far beyond the Sunday afternoon tournament, Nicole, and I had won 10 years ago. This year, it kicked off Friday and ran until a massive barbecue feast after Sunday's award ceremony. Nicole and Edward, her partner, had advanced to the mixed doubles finals. They'd made a name for themselves with their aggressive play, but Danny and I were set to take them on. Danny was a striking, green-eyed redhead in her 30s with a powerful build and an athletic grace. She was over 6 feet tall, with freckles that seemed to dance across her sun-kissed skin. We coordinated with matching 3/4 sleeve shirts, making us look like a unified force on the court. The finals drew a big crowd, and there was talk of a grudge match adding to the buzz. People were curious to see if any tension between Nicole and me would surface. I'd opted not to shake hands before the game, citing a sore arm. The match went smoothly, with Danny and me consistently ahead, moving in perfect harmony on the court while Nicole and Edward scrambled to keep up. The crowd was captivated by Danny's graceful leaps, her flawless timing as she blocked and spiked the ball with precision. But midway through the second set, I shifted tactics, hitting the ball lower, targeting Edward directly. One shot seemed to be aimed at the open court, but I redirected, and it hit Edward square in the face, knocking him down. The game paused while they cleaned up his bloody nose, and after that, I stopped aiming directly at him. The match was over in no time, straight sets, 21-4, 21-10, a solid win for Danny and me. We went to shake hands at the net. When Nicole reached out, she asked, "What about your arm?" "It's all right, ma'am," I replied, loud enough for others to hear. Then, in a low voice just for her, I added, "You're on a losing team, Nicole." She pulled her hand back, her face twisting in anger, and took a swing at me. I dodged easily, just like I had on the court. She checked around quickly to see if anyone noticed, but nobody was close enough to catch what happened. Spectators must have assumed she was a sore loser, maybe jealous, as she walked away with a scowl. At the award ceremony, I found out that, for the first time, the small plaque on the perpetual trophy would include not just the winners' names, but the losing team's names and the score. Nicole looked genuinely upset when she realized her name would be etched into the record of that defeat. At the barbecue afterward, Chris approached Danny. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" She smiled politely. "I don't think so, but I get that a lot." Danny and I had been friends in college, and I jumped in to explain. Danny and I used to play volleyball together. She was always the star, made it to the Olympics on the U.S. beach volleyball team, but had to step down due to an ankle injury. She still gets recognized. "Ah, that makes sense," Chris said, nodding. After I took Danny home that night, she invited me in for a nightcap. She changed, and we settled on her couch with our drinks. She looked at me, her green eyes warm. "You know, Kurt, this started as a rematch, but these last few weeks, I've really enjoyed our time together," she said, leaning in and giving me a soft, lingering kiss. When we pulled apart, I looked at her closely, noticing every delicate detail, the soft curves of her lips, the light catching the freckles on her face, the sparkle in her eyes. "Danny, I'd love to explore something more with you," I said, "but right now, it feels like this might just be me reflecting on my past." "You deserve better than being part of an echo of something that's over," she smiled, understanding. "I don't want to be anyone's reflection either," she replied. We agreed to go on a real date in a few weeks, after taking time to clear our heads. After a gentle kiss, I walked back to my apartment alone, feeling grounded for the first time in months. The divorce had been finalized, and though Nicole and I were living separate lives, we still shared the same community, attending the same church, mingling with the same friends. At work, Ben asked me how I was handling things. "Are you ready to let go of the revenge board?" he asked. I thought about it. "Honestly, Ben, I still don't feel like I've resolved 10 years of lies or a decade of love that was treated as disposable. It feels like she tossed me aside like an old shirt she didn't want anymore." Ben gave a knowing look. "Well, I've been working on an idea. It's evolved, but before we get to that, let's go over the board." At noon, the team gathered in a conference room to review the revenge matrix. Before we started, I picked up a red marker and updated the board. I wrote "bloody nose from volleyball" next to the physical pain category and added "initial divorce announcement" and "sporting humiliation" under social humiliation. "Red means it's done," I announced. "Now, Ben, what's your new idea?" Ben explained his suggestion, laying out the strategy carefully. His remarks had two components. One was something I'd already discussed with Evan, which I was handling, but the second option was entirely up to me. We spent a while discussing the pros and cons, weighing the long-term effects and the potential fallout. By the time the meeting wrapped up, I was left with a lot to consider, unsure of the path I'd take next. After everything had gone down, I tried to keep my focus on moving forward. But then I heard that Nicole was pregnant and living with Edward in the apartment she'd taken in the divorce. I'd done my best to avoid reminders of her, even skipping church. Still, one Sunday, as fate would have it, I ran into her in the parking lot. She saw me, wearing a smug smile as if she'd won something. "Aren't you going to congratulate me, Kurt?" she asked, hand resting on her pregnant belly. I forced a calm expression. "Thought you said your perfect body was too precious for pregnancy, Nicole, or was his top-shelf seat just too good to resist?" She rolled her eyes. It must have been strong because it wasn't planned, believe it or not. "How far along?" I asked, barely able to contain my contempt. 7 months, she replied, her smirk growing wider. "So you didn't even wait for the ink to dry before jumping into it, huh?" I sneered. She tossed her hair back. "Oh, please, Kurt. You and your little volleyball partner are the real losers here. Always have been." I let out a bitter laugh, not caring any more about appearances. "Well, I hope you enjoy your top-tier Monte Carlo vacation. Just keep an air sickness bag handy," I said, ready to turn and leave. "Goodbye, loser," she muttered as she got into her car without another look. As much as I wanted to leave that encounter behind, I couldn't help but watch from a distance as her life, that perfect life she'd so carefully crafted, started to unravel. The company she was so proud of, the job that was worth more than me, started sinking fast. They'd built their prize software on stolen code, and now the original owners were coming after them for every penny they'd made. Layoffs hit, and those lavish six-figure bonuses she boasted about Gone. Soon, her entire company was fighting to keep the doors open, scrambling to negotiate a costly licensing deal to avoid complete shutdown. Budget shrink, morale nosedived, and Edward, her so-called ideal partner, was in no mood to deal with the aftermath. As the pregnancy continued, Edward's attention drifted and his frustration grew. He no longer cared about doctor's appointments or baby plans. I imagine him feeling more trapped and fulfilled, realizing this wasn't the high society life he'd envisioned. Then, one day, Edward decided he'd had enough. Nicole came home to find him packing the last of his things into a suitcase. "What are you doing, Edward?" she asked, her voice sharp with panic. He glanced at her without emotion. "I quit the company and took a job on the West Coast. My flight's in an hour." Her face fell. "But the baby's due any day now." "When will you be back?" He shrugged, not even bothering to look up. "I don't plan on coming back, Nicole. You have health insurance that should cover the birth. But what about helping with our child?" "What about us?" she stammered, her voice shaking. Edward finally looked at her, and his voice was as cold as stone. "Nicole, I enjoy my freedom, art galleries, fine dining, vacations in Monte Carlo. Diapers and strollers, not my thing. Edward, please. I thought we loved each other. I thought everything would get better once the baby was here," she pleaded, her eyes filling with tears. He just gave a small, indifferent shrug. "Goodbye, Nicole," he said and walked out, leaving her standing there alone. Nicole fell onto the sofa, feeling utterly shattered, but she didn't even have time to process it. A sharp pain shot through her, and a sudden rush of liquid told her her water had broken. Frantically, she grabbed her phone and dialed Morgan, a friend from work. "Morgan, I'm in labor, and Edward just left for the airport. I need help," she cried, her voice trembling. "Oh, Nicole, I'm sorry, but I'm out of town with my sister. Try calling Sue or Annabelle. They're closer to you," Morgan replied before the call ended. Panic setting in, Nicole tried calling both Sue and Annabelle, but neither picked up. She realized she was completely alone. Desperate, she grabbed her baby bag, got into her BMW, and somehow managed to drive a few blocks before the contractions got too intense to keep going. Sitting there, stranded on the side of the road, she scrolled through her contacts and finally landed on my name. Taking a shaky breath, she pressed call, hoping beyond hope I would answer. "Kirk." I answered, a bit stunned to see her number flash across my screen. "Oh, thank God." "Kurt, I need help. Please, can you come right now?" she begged, her voice raw with desperation. "What's going on, Nicole? Why are you calling me?" I asked, confused by the urgency in her voice. "Kurt, I'm in labor. I'm just a few blocks away near the Briarwood Place apartments. I'm on the street. Please, I can't do this alone," she pleaded. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my own frustration in check. "All right, I'll be there soon," I replied, hanging up. I found her BMW parked haphazardly on the side of the road, her headlights and hazards flashing. I pulled up, got out, and walked over to her window. She rolled it down, looking worn out and desperate. "Thank you for coming, Kurt," she whispered, struggling to catch her breath. "Do you need help with the car?" I asked, noticing her baby bag tossed onto the passenger seat. "No, it's not the car," she gasped, wincing through a contraction. "My water broke and the baby's coming. I need you to take me to the hospital." I glanced around, trying to process the situation. "Where's Edward?" Her face twisted in pain as tears filled her eyes. "He left. He's on a plane right now, heading to the West Coast." I stared at her, trying to comprehend it. "You're giving birth, and he just left? Call him back." She shook her head, her voice breaking. "He won't come back, Kurt. He said he doesn't want to be a father." I took a steadying breath, fighting down my disbelief. "All right, hand me your phone." She passed it over, and I called emergency services. "Yes, I'm with a woman in labor on Avalma Drive, near the Briarwood Place apartments. Please send an ambulance immediately." I handed her phone back, watching as another contraction took hold, and she doubled over in pain. When she looked up again, her eyes were full of desperation. "Kurt, please, just take me to the hospital. I don't want to ruin my car." I raised an eyebrow, glancing around the BMW's leather interior. "Nice car. Guess it was expensive, and that suit looks pricey too." She blinked, looking at me, clearly confused. "What?" "It turns out the software I wrote for your company is actually owned by mine. According to my employment agreement," I explained. "And since your company profited from it, they now owe massive licensing fees to mine. While you were cashing in those 6-figure bonuses, I got a 7-figure payout." Her face seemed to go blank as another contraction hit, and I realized she probably wasn't even processing half of what I was saying. I looked at her, feeling a mix of pity and something close to satisfaction. "The ambulance will be here soon, Nicole. I have plans tonight, so I need to go." "Kurt, please," she gasped, her voice strained as the pain intensified. "Stay until they arrive. And help with my car?" I shook my head, keeping my tone cool and calm. "That's what a husband, or at least the father, would do, Nicole." Kurt, she cried out, fumbling to open her car door as another contraction overwhelmed her. I stopped, looked back at her one last time. You and Edward are perfect for each other, Nicole. Without another word, I got into my car, started the engine, and drove off, leaving her to face the consequences of her choices alone. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.